Welcome to the Ekios Zone. Pop music is arguably the most commercially successful and globally recognized genre in the history of contemporary music. It has evolved over the course of the 20th and 21st centuries, adapting to cultural shifts, technological advancements, and changes in the music industry. From its early beginnings in the 20th century to its current global dominance, pop music has continually shaped and been shaped by the cultural and social dynamics of its time. Here, we explore the origins of pop music, its key development, and evolution of the genre through different musical periods. The 1900s to the 1940s, beginnings of pop music. The term pop music is short for popular music, and while the modern conception of pop as a genre didn't fully take shape until the mid-20th century, its roots can be traced back much earlier. Popular music in the early 20th century was largely driven by vaudeville, Broadway musicals, and the early days of recorded music. In the United States, the rise of Tin Pan Alley in New York City, a district known for its publishing houses, marked the beginning of popular song as we understand it today. In the 1920s and 1930s, jazz music began to influence popular music, with artists like Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and Bing Crosby becoming mainstream stars. The development of radio broadcasting in the 1920s and the proliferation of phonograph records helped to spread these artists' sounds, making them household names and solidifying the importance of music as a form of mass entertainment. This era's pop music was still primarily influenced by live performances, big bands, and crooners, as well as the growing appeal of musicals on Broadway. During the late 1930s and 1940s, big bands and swing music dominated the pop scene, with artists like Glenn Miller, Frank Sinatra, and Bing Crosby leading the way. The swing era was marked by orchestras playing danceable, upbeat tunes that became an integral part of American culture, especially in the context of wartime and post-Depression society. 1950s and 1960s, rise of pop as a genre. Pop music, as a distinct genre, began to emerge in the 1950s, influenced heavily by the rise of rock and roll and the commercial viability of the recording industry. The introduction of the LP record in the 1950s allowed for full albums to be sold, which transformed the way pop music was created, consumed, and marketed. Artists like Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, and Little Richard blended rhythm and blues, country, and gospel influences into a new form of energetic and rebellious music that resonated with the younger generation. The birth of rock and roll, however, was still rooted in the traditions of pop music, as it had wide crossover appeal with mainstream audiences. The early 1960s brought the explosion of the Beatles, the Beach Boys, and the British Invasion, which reshaped the landscape of pop music. The Beatles, in particular, are widely regarded as one of the most influential bands in the history of popular music. Their experimentation with harmonies, song structure, and studio techniques set new standards for what pop music could be. Songs like I Wanna Hold Your Hand from 1963 and Hey Jude in 1968 were catchy, memorable, and accessible to large audiences, marking a shift in pop music towards more sophisticated compositions while still maintaining broad commercial appeal. Around the same time, the Motown sound, pioneered by Berry Gordy and artists like the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, and Stevie Wonder, emerged as a defining force in pop music. The Motown label blended R&B with pop sensibilities, creating highly polished, radio-friendly songs that appealed to both black and white audiences. These artists produced some of the most enduring pop music of the 1960s, with hits like My Girl by The Temptations and Stop in the Name of Love by the Supremes. 1970s, the disco era. The 1970s were a pivotal decade for pop music, marked by the rise of disco and the influence of synthesizers and studio production techniques. Disco music, with its infectious dance beats and electronic production, had a significant impact on pop culture. Artists like Donna Summer, the Bee Gees, and Casey and the Sunshine Band led the disco movement, producing a wave of hits like Stayin' Alive and I Will Survive that became anthems of the decade. Disco's appeal was not limited to the dance floor. It permeated the mainstream, influencing pop, funk, and soul music throughout the 1970s. The 1970s also marked the rise of glam rock, with artists like David Bowie, T-Rex, and Queen pushing the boundaries of pop music by introducing theatrical performances, larger-than-life personas, and a fusion of rock and pop. This era saw pop music embracing flamboyance, style, and experimentation. Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody in 1975, for example, was a groundbreaking composition that incorporated operatic sections, hard rock riffs, and progressive rock elements, yet it was undeniably a pop hit. At the same time, punk rock emerged as a reaction against the polished, commercial nature of mainstream pop. Bands like the Ramones and the Sex Pistols rejected the excesses of the 1970s pop and rock scenes, advocating for a raw, stripped-down approach to music. Though punk was more of a subculture than a direct influence on mainstream pop, its ethos of rebellion and DIY spirit would later inspire pop musicians in the 1980s and beyond. 1980s to 1990s, Globalization of Pop. The 1980s was the decade when pop music fully embraced synthesizers and electronic production techniques, leading to the rise of synth pop and new wave music. Artists like Michael Jackson, Madonna, and Prince became global superstars, defining the sound of 1980s pop. Michael Jackson's Thriller in 1982 is one of the best-selling albums of all time, and its singles including Billie Jean and Beat It became iconic pop songs. The album's use of synths, drum machines, and innovative production techniques helped shape the sound of modern pop music. Madonna's career in the 1980s also exemplified the fusion of pop music with fashion, music videos, and cultural self-expression. Her albums Like a Virgin in 1984 and True Blue in 1986 featured infectious melodies combined with provocative themes, and her visual identity through MTV helped define pop's new emphasis on visual media as much as on sound. In the 1990s, pop music continued to evolve, with the rise of boy bands, girl groups, and the global success of Britpop and hip-hop. The dominance of artists like Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, and Spice Girls marked the resurgence of teen-oriented pop music. Meanwhile, in the UK, Britpop bands like Oasis and Blur injected a distinctly British sound into global pop music, blending indie rock influences with mainstream appeal. In addition, the 1990s saw the rise of hip-hop and R&B influences in mainstream pop music. Artists like TLC, Destiny's Child, and Usher helped shape the sound of modern pop with elements of urban music, creating a more diverse and hybridized approach to pop music. Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston were also key figures in blending pop with R&B, introducing more complex vocal techniques and emotional depth to the genre. The 2000s, the digital age of pop. The 2000s ushered in a new era of pop music, with the rise of digital technology, the internet, and online streaming, reshaping how music was produced and consumed. Pop music increasingly became defined by its collaboration with other genres, including electronic dance music, hip-hop, and indie music. Artists like Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, Beyoncé, and Ariana Grande became major figures in pop music, each bringing their own unique style while still adhering to the genre's essential hooks and melodies. The rise of digital production tools like Auto-Tune and Ableton Live allowed pop music to become more polished, more experimental, and more global than ever before. The digital age has also made it easier for artists to release music independently and for niche subgenres of pop to emerge, including tropical house, trap pop, and indie pop. One of the most noticeable trends in the 2010s was the blurring of lines between pop and hip-hop. Artists like Drake, Post Malone, and Travis Scott have incorporated rap, trap beats, and urban influences into their pop music, creating a sound that resonates with both hip-hop and pop audiences. In contrast, pop artists like Billie Eilish have embraced a more minimalistic, alternative approach, demonstrating that pop music is no longer defined by a single, unifying sound. Wrap up. Pop music has undergone significant transformation since its origins in the early 20th century. From the swing era and crooners of the 1930s to the disco, synthpop, and EDM-driven sounds of the 21st century, pop music has remained a reflection of changing cultural, technological, and societal landscapes. The genre has continually adapted to new production techniques, cultural shifts, and global trends, while maintaining its core appeal: catchy melodies, memorable hooks, and widespread accessibility. Today, pop music remains the most influential and versatile genre in popular culture, constantly evolving and innovating while still remaining firmly entrenched in its origins as popular music.